A garbage bag split open under the weight of a trembling paw as a filthy, frail bear cub dragged itself deeper into the alley's shadows. Rain had fallen earlier, and the pavement still glistened beneath the dim buzz of a flickering street lamp, reflecting a city that never stopped moving. But here, in this narrow stretch between two forgotten buildings, time felt frozen. Steam rose from a nearby sewer grate, and the stench of decay clung to everything, masking the soft panting of the creature hunched over the trash. Its fur was soaked and clumped with grease, clinging like wet paper to a frame of skin and bone. Every rib protruded like a question, like a cry no one had answered. A rat scurried past the cub's paw, and for a second it flinched, too weak to react, too tired to fight. Behind a nearby window, laughter echoed from a television left on too loud, and a siren wailed in the distance, but nothing touched this moment. No one saw the way the cub licked the inside of a crumpled fast food wrapper with the precision of something starving yet still careful, as if remembering better meals, better days. Its eyes weren't wild. They were hollow. Not born of the forest, not anymore, but carved by absence, of warmth, of safety, of a mother who wasn't coming back. Rain began to fall again in soft, unhurried drops, settling onto its matted fur as the cub slowly curled its body against a cold plastic bin. There was no fear left in its bones, only fatigue, only surrender. It didn't know it had become a spectacle, a curiosity in the wrong place. It only knew hunger and cold, and the crushing silence of a world that once echoed with its mother's breath, but now only rang with emptiness. Long before the alley, before the garbage and the hollow eyes, the cub had known a very different world. It was born beneath a canopy of towering pines, in a den carved into the slope of a mist-draped mountain. The air there was thick with the scent of wet earth and blooming moss, and the world moved with a slower, older rhythm. Days began with the sound of wind through trees, and ended in the comfort of warmth pressed against its mother's chest. Her presence was everything: shelter, guidance, safety. With each season, she showed the cub how to survive, how to peel bark in search of grubs, how to fish in a rushing stream without slipping, and most importantly, how to sense danger before it arrived. She taught the cub to fear the scent of fuel, the echo of metal, the strange, straight lines of human intrusion. The unnatural always came with noise, the crack of something falling that should have stood forever, the roar of engines where silence used to live. But no lesson could prepare the cub for the day that noise came too close. It started like a low tremor in the earth, then rose into a chaos of chainsaws, shouting, and the splintering of trees crying out as they fell. The mother had gone to investigate, to protect. She didn't return. For 2 days, the cub waited near the edge of their den, pacing, whining, sniffing the air for a trace of her scent. The birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. By the 3rd day, hunger took hold. The cub wandered farther than it ever had, down slopes it had never dared to cross. It stumbled into areas where the trees thinned unnaturally and the scent of humans thickened. At first, it thought only of food, berries, roots, anything. But every step closer to survival took it deeper into a world that did not make sense. The ground grew harder. The trees gave way to fences. The stars were replaced by streetlights. The cub kept moving, unaware that every paw print away from the forest was erasing a piece of who it once was. By the time the cub had mapped out the alleyways and backstreets of the city, it was no longer just a wanderer. It was a survivor. Weeks had passed since it had crossed into this unnatural maze, and though it still moved with the hesitancy of something misplaced, it had begun to learn. It knew which dumpsters behind the restaurants offered the softest bread, which corners saw less traffic from angry shopkeepers, and when the mechanical growl of the garbage truck signaled new offerings. But no matter how quickly it adapted, the city refused to see it as anything more than a nuisance. Each night, it scavenged beneath the buzz of neon signs and the hum of surveillance cameras. Its movements were slow, its limbs worn down by asphalt and glass, yet it dragged a torn trash bag twice its size across the street like it was prey. One camera caught the moment, the bear cub, barely standing, clutching its prize in its teeth, looking around as if bracing for impact. The footage was uploaded online the next morning. But instead of sympathy, The clip was met with mockery. Users added music, captions, laughing emojis. Some called it Dumpster King or Garbage Grizzly. A few thousand shares later, the clip made its way to local news sites as a novelty, an oddity spotted in the urban wild. No one asked how a wild bear cub ended up alone in a city. No one asked where its mother was, or what had gone wrong in the forest it came from. They watched, laughed, and scrolled on. In person, it fared no better. Children threw stones when they saw it on the street. Adults chased it with brooms or metal rods. No one wanted to deal with a wild animal, especially one that smelled of decay and desperation. Yet it kept returning, not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. Every day the city reminded it that it didn't belong. And still it came back, dragging bags, licking grease from cardboard, surviving not just the hunger, but the cruelty of being seen and still unloved. From the fourth floor of a weathered apartment building overlooking the alley, a woman watched in silence. Her balcony was small, overgrown with wilted plants she no longer tended, and her presence was as quiet as the wind that passed between the buildings. She had seen the cub days ago, a fleeting glimpse in the early hours of morning as it limped past her view, dragging something limp and rustling. At first, she thought it was a trick of her restless mind, but the next night it returned, same pace, same silence, same haunting weight in its frame. She began watching more closely, not out of curiosity, but because something about the way it moved unsettled her. It avoided the loudest corners. It waited until the last car passed before crossing the street. Its limp grew worse on colder nights. She noticed where it slept, beneath a leaning fence behind the broken air conditioning units. She noticed when it was missing. She began to count its appearances the way others might count days. Inside her apartment, the walls still held the remnants of a life that had paused unexpectedly. A crib tucked in the corner, untouched. A closet filled with folded clothes too small for anyone grown. Her world had once been louder, filled with crying lullabies, the beeping of hospital monitors. She had been a nurse, always in control, always moving forward. Until the accident. Until the morning when breath stopped coming, and her child's room became a museum of everything that never got to be. Watching the bear cub didn't bring comfort. It stirred something deeper, an ache she had buried beneath schedules and silence. The way it moved alone in the dark, the way it pressed itself into corners, the way it never cried out even when injured. It mirrored a grief she knew far too well. Not the grief of pain, but the grief of being left behind. One night, without ceremony, she left a small bowl of food near the alley's entrance. Nothing extravagant, just enough to ease a hunger she could recognize. It wasn't an act of rescue. It was a gesture between two beings shaped by absence. Something wordless, something broken, something still alive. The cub began to return, not just out of necessity, but as if drawn by something more than food. Night after night, it crept back to the same quiet corner where a bowl always waited. Its steps were still cautious, but the desperation in its movements began to fade. The limp remained, but its legs grew steadier. The dull glaze in its eyes gave way to a flicker of alertness, a softness that hadn't been there before. Slowly, it was beginning to remember how to live, not just survive. From above, the woman sat quietly behind the railing of her balcony, wrapped in an old shawl that still smelled faintly of the baby powder she never had the heart to throw away. She never called out, never made a sound to startle it. Her presence was constant but invisible, like a guardian ghost watching over something too fragile to touch. The bear never looked up, but somehow it knew. It always glanced toward the building before it left, as if acknowledging the one soul in the city that didn't turn it away. Their bond existed without words, without touch. Two lives moving parallel, both shaped by loss, both slowly filling the cracks that absence had carved into them. The alley, once a place of filth and despair, became a quiet sanctuary for healing. Not perfect, not safe, but enough. Neighbors began to notice. Some scoffed openly, muttering about disease, danger, wild things that didn't belong in their streets. A few called her foolish, warned her she was creating a problem. But she didn't respond. She didn't feed the cub out of pity. She did it because in that creature's hunger, she saw her own. And in its recovery, She found the faint pulse of something long buried. Eventually, she began filming the visits. Not for the world, not for views or sympathy. She never posted them. She kept the videos on an old device tucked in her drawer. They were shaky, quiet clips, the cub chewing slowly, blinking at the sky, nudging the bowl closer with a paw. For her, they weren't evidence. They were memories. Proof that something still responded to care. Proof that life, even broken, could still reach back. The bowl sat untouched one morning, its contents soggy from the night's rain. At first, she told herself the cub was just late. Maybe it had found something better. Maybe it had overslept beneath a warm vent. But as the hours passed and the shadows stretched long without any sign of him, an unease crept in. Slow, suffocating, familiar. She stayed at the window longer than usual that night, staring into the alley with the kind of stillness only fear can bring. The next morning, the food remained again. The alley felt different. Quieter. Colder. The kind of silence that follows absence, not peace. Trash still littered the pavement. Rats still scurried through broken crates. But the heartbeat of the place was missing. She waited that evening too, and the next, her eyes scanning the streetlights as if he might appear beneath them like a ghost. But the cub was gone. By the 5th day, she had stopped trying to sleep. She questioned every noise, every shadow. It wasn't just concern anymore. It was grief waking back up in her bones, remembering how it felt to search a hospital ward for signs that never came. When the garbage collector passed by on his morning route, she asked him, careful, quiet, as if the words might shatter something. He paused, then mentioned animal control had picked up something a few nights ago, near the lower end of the district. He hadn't seen it himself, but he remembered the truck. She moved quickly after that, shelter to shelter, building to building. No one had records of a cub, no logs of a transfer. Some looked at her with mild confusion, others with blank indifference. Most barely listened. To them, it was just another stray, if it ever existed at all. Each passing day without answers felt like losing her child all over again. The same helplessness, the same spiraling ache of not knowing. Not death, not closure, just a vanishing. Something once fragile and alive, suddenly swallowed by a world that refused to tell her where it had gone. The letter arrived without warning, tucked in a plain white envelope with no return address. It rested quietly among bills and circulars, almost invisible in its simplicity. But the moment she opened it, her hands began to shake. The note inside was short, written in neat handwriting that seemed both formal and deeply human. "We think you helped save a life. Come see for yourself." Folded beneath the note was a photograph. In the picture, a bear cub stood in the center of a fenced enclosure. It was cleaner now, its fur brushed by care, its eyes brighter. The bones no longer pressed harshly against its skin. But there was no mistaking who it was. The posture, the tilt of the head, the soft bend in one ear. It was him. The cub. Alive. She stared at the photo for a long time, not moving, not breathing. When she finally stood, her legs felt foreign beneath her. She didn't rush. She dressed slowly, methodically, as if afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too fast. The wildlife rehab center sat just outside the city, hidden behind a stretch of quiet road and a line of whispering trees. The building was modest, unassuming. When she entered, no one asked questions. A staff member simply guided her down a hallway to a room with reinforced glass and a soft hum of filtered air. There, on the other side of the glass, was the cub. Larger now, but undeniably the same. He moved with purpose, no longer limping, and paused for a moment to look toward her side of the room. Her breath caught. The rush of feeling was immediate and overwhelming. Her knees gave way before she could catch herself, and she sank onto a bench as her eyes filled, not with sadness, but with a kind of awe. He had made it. He had survived. And somehow, so had she. At the rehabilitation center, the cub entered a new chapter of life, far removed from the city's filth and hostility. Here, surrounded by trees and enclosed fields, it was no longer a creature of alleys and concrete. It was given room to breathe, to heal, to remember what it was meant to be. Vets and wildlife specialists monitored its progress with quiet diligence, documenting the long list of ailments it had carried from its time scavenging human waste. Malnourishment, stomach infections, abrasions from broken glass. The toll of urban survival was visible in every inch of its body. But with time, nutrition, and care, the damage began to recede. They used her videos too, the ones she had quietly recorded from her balcony. Frame by frame, they studied his gait, his eating habits, his responses to sound. Her private memories became essential data. From those clips, they identified behavioral gaps, moments where the cub had stopped acting like a bear, molded instead by human proximity and hunger. Slowly, they began retraining those instincts. They introduced foraging tasks, removed dependency on human smells, and played nature sounds in the background to reactivate his responses. And through it all, the woman came. She arrived each week without calling ahead, always during the quietest hours. She never asked to touch the cub or cross the observation glass. She simply sat in the small room beside his enclosure, watching in silence as he grew stronger, more agile, more himself. Sometimes she stayed for 10 minutes. Other times, she lingered for hours. The staff began to recognize her not just as a visitor, but as part of the cub's story. They never questioned her silence. They didn't need to. She was the woman who had mourned without words, loved without condition, and now bore witness without needing to be seen. On the days she cried, no one interrupted. Her grief, like the cub's recovery, was sacred, quiet, ongoing, and deeply human. Months passed, and with each one, the cub shed another layer of its former life. What had once been frailty became strength. Its eyes, once dulled by exhaustion, now held the quiet alertness of the wild. When the center finally announced that he was ready for release into a protected reserve, it came as no surprise. He had done what so few lost creatures managed to do. He had made it back to where he belonged. They offered to let her join the release, to stand beside the staff as the cub took his first steps back into the world that had once raised him. But she declined, not out of fear or distance, but because she understood that not all farewells need to be touched. Some are meant to be witnessed from afar, with a heart that knows when to let go. From a slope overlooking the tree line, she watched silently as the transport gate opened. The cub hesitated only briefly before stepping into the soft earth, his body sure, his pace calm. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He walked forward like something returning, not leaving. And then, just before he vanished into the thick green beyond, he turned. Not fully, not deliberately, but just enough. A tilt of the head, a pause, as if something unseen called him to look back. She stood at the railing, her fingers curled tightly, and smiled. Her grief, once heavy and silent, no longer anchored her. It lifted gently, like a bridge between two lives once lost. Back home, the balcony still overlooked the same narrow alley, the same cracked pavement and rusting bins. But it no longer felt empty. The bowl was gone, the shadows familiar again, yet something had shifted. Not in the world outside, but within her. The silence she once feared had softened. It no longer echoed loss, it held meaning. The story of the cub, once mocked and misunderstood, found new life online. This time, it spread not through ridicule, but through reverence. News outlets covered the rescue. Wildlife advocates shared the journey. People across the world, touched by what they saw, sent donations to the rehabilitation center, helping more animals, just like him. She remained in the background, as she always had, never claiming attention. But quietly, she began to volunteer, cleaning enclosures, preparing food, sitting near cages that held fear and pain. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. What she offered couldn't be explained in words. It was the same gentleness that once left a bowl at the edge of an alley without expecting anything in return. And so, the story closes not with an ending, but with a quiet continuation. Some losses never leave us. But sometimes, in the quiet corners of broken places, life offers a second chance. Not just for those we save, but for the parts of us we thought were lost forever. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. We believe in telling the quiet stories, the ones that reveal hope in forgotten places and kindness where it's least expected. Subscribe to the channel if you want more true stories like this. where compassion still has a voice. Sometimes, a single click is all it takes to help share something beautiful with the world.